We are live.
Good morning. Welcome to the September 4th Social Services Committee meeting. The roll call has been taken by the clerk. Thank you. If there are any declarations of conflicts of interest for any items appearing on the agenda, please let me know. Seeing none, if they do come up, let me know at the time. At this time, I'm going to ask members if there are any items the committee wishes to separate for discussion purposes. Item 5.4, which is the 2025 shared social services budget, is already separated as there will be a staff presentation on this item. It wasn't listed on the agenda, but with no objection from members, we will add this item. I'll look around to see if there are any objections. Seeing none. Are there any separations? Councillor Samwell.
5.2 Housing Stability Wintering Plan.
Thank you. Councillor Martin.
Yeah, 5.1, Canada, Ontario Community Housing.
Thank you. Do I see any others? No? Then could I please get a mover and seconder to place all items for consideration on the floor? Thank you. Mayor Davis. Yeah, thank you. And then clerk, will you please call the vote?
The items that are subject to the vote are item 5.3, appointment of Ontario Works Administrator, and 6.1, minutes from June 5th. All those in favor? That carries. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now call upon Brian Hutchings, Chief Administration Officer, to make a presentation on item 5.4, 2025 Shared Social Services Budget. Brian, you have 10 minutes for your presentation, and questions will be held over until we discuss the item. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair Bell. Good morning. I'm Brian Hutchings, as mentioned, the CEO of the City of Brantford, and I'm pleased to bring forward the 2025 Shared Social Services Budget for committee's consideration. I'm joined here today by our Senior Director of Community Services and Social Development, Mary Musson, as well as the Director of Community Strategies and Family Supports, Michelle Connor, as well as many managers from all the departments across this commission. We'll begin by reviewing the 2025 operating budgets for children's services and early years, family and income stability, as well as housing and homeless services. The community services and social development budget is for shared services that the city provides system oversight for and or delivers the designated service manager on behalf of the city and the county. This includes housing, homelessness, social assistance, licensed childcare, and early on programs. Staff are diligent to ensure that families across both the City of Brantford and the County of Brant have access to high quality programs and services. In children's services, 29% of the childcare spaces and 20% of the early on programs are located in the County of Brant, with childcare investment in the county increasing from 1.8 million in 2020 to over 5.6 million in 2024. With more investment coming across the region as we continue to implement the $10 a day childcare program. In addition to the Ontario Works office in Brantford, services are provided at the Cowan Health Hub to over 200 individuals in the county who receive social assistance with continued digital and virtual services and support individuals with transportation or location barriers. Housing staff continue to oversee and provide property management service to the local housing corporation buildings in the county, and are also currently managing rehabilitation of Sunrise Villa in Burford and affordable housing development at 174 Trillium Way in Paris. Throughout the latter half of 2023 and 2024, the Housing Stability Worker Team has collaborated with the County of Brant Bylaw Department in developing a joint response to encampments. So we're here to talk about 2025 initiatives, what's planned. This is earlier than the normal budget process as part of our shared service agreements. You'll see this with paramedics as well. Those who sit on the paramedics committee, we spend our summer doing the budgets, and we go through a process between us and the county. So some of the initiatives, despite funding constraints, staff in both departments continue to make system and service delivery improvements with the view to improve quality of life for all citizens of Brantford and the county of Brant. Children's early services in early years are continued the implementation of Canada-wide early learning and childcare with the further reduction of parent fees, for the most expensive spaces, and supporting the ongoing growth of available licensed childcare spaces with new childcare builds expected in North Paris and at both Brandlin and the new West Brant elementary schools. FIS, also known as Ontario Works, will implement best practices learned through our service navigation pilot to inform ongoing service delivery. For example, service navigators that help people navigate all the various services across the city of Brantford and the county of Brant are working on site at SOAR, formerly known as St. Leonard's Community Services, and accompany clients to community appointments when they need additional supports, a model that will extend into 2025. Housing and homelessness staff continue to aggressively create more affordable housing spaces. One will be completed and the ribbon cutting the next few weeks at Lucy Marco, as well as 174 Trillium Way in Paris is scheduled for completion in spring of 2025. The rehabilitation, which was announced last week, if we do the due diligence, if the due diligence clears on 389 West Street, I also known as Foxridge, and will also commence in the fall of 2025. The Housing Stability Division continues to enhance coordinated access system, which is very important for our clients, coordinating encampment response internally and with the community partners. And we'll be reporting back in Q1 of 2025 on program outcomes, recommendations on the Housing Stability Pilot Program. Challenges, Mr. Chair. You can see our budget is higher than inflation. It's not something that I normally would bring forth, but you can see probably the message of this whole message is we're doing more with less, and we're not getting funding from our partner, which is the province of Ontario. The communities of Brant and Brantford are rapidly growing both in population and in demographics, and with that comes demand for services. Along with the growth, the communities are facing an increase in housing, instability and homelessness, and need for mental health and addiction services. Provincial mandates, accountability agreements, change in budget formulas, and strategic changes have boggled people like myself, who's an accountant, to continue to impact all the shared services and how they are provided. Provincial funding in the Ontario Works program for all municipalities in Ontario has been frozen at a level since 2018, actual expenditures since 2019, while caseloads continue to increase with 2025 funding allocations for the family income supports unknown to date and no increase to expect the resulting budget pressures for fall municipalities to bear. Just a little sample of some data. Caseload in the county of Brant increased by 18% between March 2023 and March 2024, from 173 clients to 205. 40% of the adults do not have a grade 12 education, and 81% of the adults do not have a post-secondary education. The average time an individual is on Ontario Works or FIS was 33 months, as well as the average number of asylum seekers, and this is a new stat for me in the last week, has increased from 40 cases per month to 93 cases in March 2024. The Children's Service in early years in 2025 will implement a new childcare funding formula, as I mentioned, and initiatives. They'll also continue to reduce parent fees and grow spaces, a much needed service for our community. As announced in 2024, provincial administrative funding was reduced from 10% to 5% and from 100% provincially funded to a 50-50 cost share. All these have impacted the municipal budget you're looking at. This was a topic of discussion at AMO with the minister, new Minister Dunlop, with the mayor, Councillor Samuel, Councillor Hunt, and Councillor Sicoli, and myself. For housing, projected allocations published in the Ontario Gazette for the city of Brantford are shown in Figure 2 of the shared service budget report that's in front of you. A full reduction is expected by 2030. In 2025, this is over 300,000 reduction in funding. Service manager expect to utilize grant funding issued under the National Housing Strategy to offset this ongoing decrease in annual funding, which you can see won't carry very far. There has been a reduction reaching home funding grant from the federal government by $50,680, and there's currently a $741,000 reduction in funding beginning in 26-27. Homeless prevention program, provincial grant funding has not increased based on inflation despite growing costs to maintain current service levels and increase in local need of homelessness and housing services. Allocation to service managers have been set by the province until fiscal year 26-27. So the operating budget summary, Mr. Chair, inflationary pressures are impacting both the operating and capital budgets for shared services as federal and provincial funding is not keeping pace with the cost of providing these services. The combined 2020-25 operating budget impact on services represents a 7.18% increase over last year. This has been worked on most of the summer. This number was much larger beginning of the summer. A request for 2 additional full-time community initiative coordinators to support the housing stability divisions in Can't Respond was also directed to this committee in previous committee meetings for consideration, and this would increase the budget to 8.19%. The capital forecast. Now, I must explain this. The capital forecast that we have in our budget, I know Councillor Carpenter likes to talk about this, and he probably will ask questions about this, so I'll get ahead of him. This one is, this is just showing the repairs and maintenance, capital repairs and maintenance that we have. It's, we staff worked really hard last year, entered a deal with CMHC to receive $6 million in National Co-Investment Fund to apply for that and get that. So that will go to some of our capital repairs. But the 2025 capital budget includes 13 renewal projects that are prioritized, available for this funding, as well as total capital costs for 2025 housing repairs of $3.97 million. This is the next slide. Sorry, Councillor Carter, I keep referencing you, but I think this is the next slide that I want to talk to. What the city does, which is not an ordinary practice, what we've done is all our new builds, we have budgeted. We don't budget. We actually fund out of capital asset sales. So much to what people say on social media, when we sell assets, we use them towards building. So we sold Arrowdale, we made $14 million. We've sold BSAR properties. We sold 84 Market. We have on the docket to sell the old City Hall, the tourism building, and some other buildings which are still confidential to afford to build Marlene Avenue, to build Colburn Street West, to build Lucy Marco. I know the county has contributed $11 million towards the building of 174 Trillium Way, and there's still $4 million they have left over to build another building. But this is what the city has done. It has sold assets that we could have used for other things, like the hospital, like roads, like bridges, but we're selling assets to build housings in this communities. So they're not budgeted. I know Councillor, I keep referring, has mentioned that they should be, but they're not. It's been something that's Mary and myself been working on very aggressively with real estate, selling assets to build housing in this community. I can't be any more clear than that. 60 units. So since the housing action plan progress, we built 60 units, as I mentioned, and completion attained occupancy, and 41 more units are projected this month at Lucy Marco. As I mentioned, Trillium Way will be completed in spring of 2025. And recently council approved, and right now we're going through due diligence phase of 399 West Street, which should be exciting developments, be phased development, 3 or 4 different phases of projects. You can expect the housing plan updated next month. It came last December. It was promised for June. We've been waiting for some new numbers. But I'll be honest with you, Mr. Chair, our challenge is land. It's a problem in the county, come up with things, land. It's a problem in the city to find land to build things on. So future capital challenges and goals, for all capital projects and continuous improvement project construction costs, reduction in grant funding received from other levels of governments have been significant. Since the inception of the Brantford Grant Municipal Housing Master Plan and the Mayor's Task Force, the original financial plan to fund housing development has been revised annually because of inflation, because of cost of construction, and as well as decreasing grants. And the most significantly is removing the housing as an eligible service for the collection of development charges, the cost of $42 million to the city of Brantford and the county of Brant has greatly impacted new housing development. As the housing stock ages, specifically the local housing corporation buildings, the need for building repair maintenance continues to increase. and the impact on operating budget as there is need to increase annual transfers to reserves. Available grant funding fluctuates by both development. This is always odd. The city of Brantford, and I mentioned this to the minister, is the municipality always has to be first in, then we beg for grants from the federal and the provincial government. It's reversed. It should be the opposite. And so we've seen the average of grants we received. We originally budgeted about 50% in grants. The average we're receiving is 12% from upper tier governments. So with that, Mr. Chair, there's a summary of the budgets that we've seen challenges in both from our funding partners, the federal and municipal governments, as well as inflation costs and construction and annual repairs and maintenance costs, as well as cost of living for our staff. Thank you.
Brian, thank you. That was a very fulsome report. You're going to get some questions, I'm sure, but I'll just go through the process here. The committee is now going to consider items that were separated for discussion. Could I get a mover and seconder to place all separated items on the floor? Mayor Davis, Councillor Samwell, thank you. We're going to start with item 5.4, so it's going to continue on where Brian left. Mayor Davis jumped the queue and got the first question. So I can see Councillor Howes would like to speak. Other speakers? Councillor Carpenter, Councillor Zicoli, thank you. Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I don't like the expression jump the queue. I would just simply was very quick in terms of raising my hand. I don't know if that's jumping the queue.
I haven't even asked a question. Ask the question because I wanted to speak.
So I have a question for Mr. Hutchings. And in the report, it references an announcement the federal government made in April about additional funding. And you also referred to that, I think it's called the Community Entities and Program, but they haven't yet announced how that's going to be allocated amongst all the various service managers and municipalities and housing providers across the country. Has there been any indication recently what we might actually receive or when we might be told what we're going to receive?
Good morning. Through the chair, Mary Musson, Senior Director of Community Services and Social Development. What I can say is no, we have not received any more information. This federal funding is through the Reaching Home funding stream, which is a federal grant program. It's how we fund our coordinated access, and under the Reaching Home program, the city of Brantford is the community entity for the city and the county. What we do know and what has been shared with community entities that it is supposed to help with homelessness and encampment support. We have not received any further information on when this funding is coming and how much can be expected. So we cannot rely on this for any budgetary considerations.
My next question has to do with the commitment 5 or 6 years ago that the provincial government made to paying 50% of the cost to administer Ontario Works and the Children's Services programs. They've not maintained that. Their share of the administration costs in this 2025 budget is a lot less than 50%. If they'd maintained that commitment and continued to pay 50%, how much more additional monies would we be receiving from the province? Approximately.
Thank you. Through the chair, Michelle Connor, Director of Community Strategies and Family Supports. In fact, if in FIS, they froze the funding levels at 2018 actual levels in 2019. And that would be $748,000 they would be giving us this year, probably plus inflation, but at least that much. And would mean that we would have a 0% increase in the FIS budget this year, if that was the case. And with Children's Services, sorry, it would be in the neighborhood of $500,000, sorry. And again, 0% budget increase. Children's Services budget was reduced by both 50/50 and reduced to 5% admin fund budget, so.
Well, I'd make an observation, Mr. Chair, and I know you're good with numbers as well, but when you crunch the numbers, the reason why we have an 8.19% increase in terms of dollars, $1,500,000. And you can just hear from that 740, perhaps another 400 to 500,000. At least 80 to 90% of that increase is due to the province not maintaining its commitment to share equally with us the cost of administering programs really on their behalf. It's a travesty, and if they were maintaining their commitment, we would be able to keep this budget to equal to or less than an inflationary increase. Something to be considered. We certainly at AMO, we made that presentation to the minister. Whether it'll have any impact, we'll have to see, but it's extremely unfortunate. It's a form of downloading that continues to the detriment of the property taxpayer here in Bradford.
Thank you.
And the county.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that you made that delegation to the provincial government. I hope that our local MPP is being supportive of that as well. Moving on to Councillor House.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, Mayor Davis, his last question was in the very same direction that I was heading. With taxes increasing and people talking to us and expressing concern about that, I'm often referencing the increasing costs for social services and the fact that funding was frozen since 2018. I reference that detail all the time. I wanted just to make sure I am referencing it properly. I was wondering can staff clarify for me, is it all provincial funding or has there been federal funding that has also been frozen, or is it pretty much a provincial funding source that we rely on?
I'll start this question, and I'm sure Mary and Michelle will jump in to finish Councillor House. On the FIS, I would say / Ontario Works, and I always date myself, and children's services, that's all provincial. That's all provincial cost sharing. There's some minimal federal stuff in the children's services, but it's flowed through the province. When we talk housing, there is some federal monies in there. And Mary will complete that, but as part of being the CMSM, the Consolidated Municipal Service Manager for this area for County of Brant's End, that we have a relationship with the province where we cost share on our administrative costs. Again, we're not getting their portion. So Mary, do you want to answer the federal component?
Absolutely. Thank you. Through the chair. With the housing and homelessness services, it is shared grant funding from both the federal government and the provincial government. If you look at page 47 of the agenda package, what you will see is this year we've had a $313,000 reduction in federal funding for social housing through the Ontario Gazette. So this goes back to when the federal government and then the provincial government downloaded housing in 2099, 2000 to municipalities to run in Ontario. And we also have reduced Reaching Home administrative funding. So like I've spoken before, Reaching Home is a federal funding source for homelessness services. Our homelessness prevention program is a provincial grant funding stream that we rely heavily on for both supportive housing programs such as at 5 Marlene Avenue, as well as for rent supplements through the Strong Communities Rent Supplement Program, as well as for funding all of our homelessness services, so contracts to emergency shelter providers. The homelessness prevention program is frozen at just over $7 million in fiscal year annual funding until 2026-27, so it's not increasing with inflation. And we also receive National Housing Strategy funding, which is a federal provincial cost shared through a bilateral agreement. And that is what the COCHIOPI report in this agenda package speaks to. So we do have that funding stream as well that we're expected to use to offset the reductions through the Ontario Gazette. So it is both a reduction in federal and provincial grant funding streams for housing and homelessness services.
Thank you.
To answer your question, Councillor House?
Sorry if I can, Mr. Bell, Councillor Chair Bell. What you're hearing on the media and through the announcements is not trickling down to municipalities in a nutshell.
Okay, Ed, thank you. Those details are helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving to Councillor Carpenter.
Thank you. Brian, thank you for your presentation and your passion for housing. I know it's personal. It comes through. And I really do appreciate that. And I appreciate the honesty about the provincial and federal government, especially the provincial government, who doesn't seem to care about homelessness or housing for the poor. They care about housing for the rich, but they don't seem to care about housing for the poor whatsoever. And these guys want another round. They want to win another election. I can't imagine how we would ever put them back in office for what they've done to our communities across this province. So why do we not have a capital budget for housing. Can we not add $1 million annually to a capital budget for housing? Do we not share this with the county?
Through our shared service agreement, with the county, they agreed to contribute as part of the original plan back in 2021. We came in with a housing plan. It was going to be about $104 million. 50% of that, I mean, we're on tape, but don't quote me on it. I'm always very close, but as Joelle said, I'm I'm close enough for hand grenades and anyway, but we came in at $104 million. We thought we'd give out 50% in funding. What was left over was about $37 million to be distributed between us and the county made a commitment of $15 million, $15.125 actually. And we were going to pick up the rest of the 22 million. Those costs have inflated, Councillor, since 2021. And we've seen, as I've mentioned, instead of 50% coming from the feds and the province, we've seen about 12%. So now our portion to build has gone up. So that's where the county has committed their contribution. And I know talking to the CEO of the county, they don't have any more for this for housing. So how we've decided to do, Council, we have not budgeted for it. We've decided to basically to put sell assets to in the old days, we would have sold those assets. The money would have went to our capital budget for roads and bridges. We're now using a lot of that money for now for housing.
Yeah, I mean, but there is there not an ability for us to add to the capital budget shared to the county and the city on an annualized basis? We don't contribute a penny to the capital budget.
I think that would have to be renegotiated part of the shared service agreement with the county as part of their services. Right now, it was a static number of 15,125. But to the other side, it's not just about putting in, as Joelle will say, and who's behind me, and maybe she wants to jump in. We can't see her, but it's financing the capital budget. So we could still put a capital budget in, but it's really, where's the money coming from the finance? It can't come from DCs. And it would really be coming out of the capital reserve, which
Coming from where it's always coming
Yeah.
from, the taxpayer. So what the province has done is they've downloaded the responsibility and then they've reneged on their commitment to their funding source and they put that on the taxpayer. Is there any way we can get this message out to the general population about what the province has been doing to the taxpayer in Brantford and Brant County? Like there's got to be a way to get this message out. We all know it. We're all disgusted with it, but the public doesn't understand. When I tell the public we don't contribute a penny to the capital budget and the province is reneging on it, the public they can't believe it. So how do we get the message out to the general population so we can get the province to start doing what they're supposed to do in the first place?
It's a great question, Councillor. I mean, we can talk to our communication staff. It's a difficult message to get out because we don't want to look like we're socially not, acknowledging homelessness and housing. We want to make sure we get the message out that it's not a fair cost share. We want to support our most vulnerable in our community without look like we're being hard on them.
And one final one, if I may, just one quick one. As you know, I'm not in favor of selling assets. I think I know we do, that's what we have to do, but I know I think that's short-sighted in the long term for municipality, but we did sell Airedale. And one of the conditions of selling Airedale was that the tax revenue generated from that property was supposed to go into an account for housing. So they must be still paying taxes in the 4 years they've owned it and done nothing with it. We must be getting some tax revenue from that that's going into an account. I just want to double check to make sure that's happening.
I believe that is happening, Councillor, and it's a good segue, which isn't mentioned in our budget. We planned on making $2 million a year when those houses are built there, and that council did dedicate that to affordable housing. We will be funding all the not-for-profits because that will come forth. The 343 units, for instance, the 32 Bridge Street that the JCs are building, we'll be funding them $62,500 a unit, which will help them build those. They'll be announced this month. We just entered an agreement with them, and that'll be coming from the Airedale monies because it's in kind of perpetuity. It'll be going on for the rest of its life, and so will these mortgages with the not-for-profits. So at this point in time, I believe the last 4 years received around $62,000 to $80,000 a year from the Airedale property, roughly. Because nothing's built on it, but when things are built on it, that'll go to about $2 million.
Thank you for your passion.
Thank you, Councillor Commenter. Councillor Scobie.
Thank you. I have a question I'm going to switch gears. Emergency shelters, more specifically the hotels. Where do we find funding for that? Is it under homelessness or is it under housing?
Through the chair, the motels that we use as an extension of the emergency sheltering system is funded through homelessness. And that we do have a report coming forward as well this cycle.
Okay, because I do see a decrease there of our funding down 6% there. I guess where I'm going with this is I've heard quite a few stories lately about us turning mothers with children away, claiming that we don't have funding. And I just would like you to comment on that because I have currently a mother with 2 children camping because we don't have the funding to put her in a hotel. And I have a mother with 3 children who slept in a car for 2 nights until Nova Vita could take them in. And I just want some comment from staff to make sure that that's not happening or to see if we need an increase of funding in that particular line item.
Katerina Kuzwich, Manager of Housing Stability, through the chair. On April 4th, we halted new motel admissions due to some funding constraints. However, the Housing Resource Center does connect with me for urgent situations, such as families or single parents that are unable to be accommodated within our sheltering system. What I can share is I have not received a phone call from the Housing Resource Center in regards to these cases. So I would encourage these families to contact the emergency intake line in order to be triaged. And if they're able to be diverted, they'd be screened out, such as if they have safe family within other municipalities, someone that they can stay with temporarily, we would view that as a viable option. However, if they're unable to be diverted, then the Housing Resource Center can connect with me, and then we would be assessing need, and we would be placing those families within our motel system.
So do we have funding constraints with our hotel system right now or no?
Short answer is yes, Councillor Sokoli. We can discuss this in full. It was a report, just two reports from now. It's about the winter sheltering. It's in full detail, but yeah, the short answer is yes, we have difficulties and constraints in our hotels budgets as well as others, but instead of as Katerina has mentioned, if there is a crisis, we can try to find place for them or diversion. And I think we don't talk enough about that in the city, in the county. Most other communities are going to diversion, which means getting people, I've been doing this a long time, about 26 years. When you talk to homeless, when people enter the shelter system and stay too long in the shelter system, becomes a black hole, homelessness. And normally you try to divert people back to their families. But so the short answer is yes, we have budget constraints in our hotel system.
So the question is, we see a reduction in the budget there. Why would we see a reduction in the budget there? Is there an opportunity for us to top this up as a municipality to make sure that we're not turning away families?
Through the chair, the reason that there is a reduction is that we had to make sure that we find efficiencies and keep current service levels. So even though you do see a reduction in the budget, the current service levels will stay. Speaking for 2024, as Mr. Hutchings said, yes, we do have pressures with motel use. What I can say is at the beginning of this year, there were over 70 families being supported in motels within our system, which was quite financially cost heavy. Also, it is very important that when families enter a motel system, they don't get the same level of support as they would within an emergency shelter. And so they tend to not be able to move out of the motel system as quickly as if they had intense case management support. So we are trying to get away from using the motels as much as possible. And with the winter sheltering report that is before Social Services Committee today, we can speak some more to that. But we are trying to get away from it. We will have a certain number of motel beds available throughout the year, but we are trying to do our due diligence to ensure that everyone is diverted to the most appropriate shelter first.
Understood.
Councillor Sokoli, can I hold you up to the second round or to when we talk about winter stability? Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to reiterate what CEO Hutchins said during his opening remarks, and that's the work staff's done on this budget. Anybody that sat around this committee for any length of time knows that demand for services keeps going up, the complexity keeps going up, and yet we see the dollars coming in from our partners keeps going down. So I want to commend staff for the hard work they've done. I think this easily could have come in at a 15, 16, 20% increase. They've got it down. And as a counselor representing people in my ward, we'd always like to see it come down a little more, but it is what it is for today. I have two questions. One is a general question, and then the second one is kind of drilling down to specifics. So the first question of a general nature, maybe the CEO can help me with this one, is when you see a budgetary increase, like a fairly large one of 8% or more, how does this impact the city's multi-year budgeting process? And I'm asking that a bit from a selfish reason, because we're looking at doing multi-year budgeting at the county level. So how does the city, how does it fit in with that process? First question.
Through the chair, Joelle Daniels, City Treasurer. Certainly, this increase would be higher than what we had initially thought through the multi-year budget process. There are a number of variables that go through the multi-year, and certainly we can't predict everything. Our policies do provide some flexibility with minor variations to the budget that staff can approve. It also doesn't prohibit us from seeking out additional efficiencies and bringing those forward to remain within the targets that we set during the multi-year budget process. And as a requirement of the Municipal Act, the budget for second, third, and fourth years of a multi-year do need to be reconfirmed by council. So we will be bringing all of that information back, and we will highlight some of these unavoidable constraints that we've had, such as sort of unforeseen provincial funding reductions and other unforeseen items.
Okay, thank you for that response. So flexibility is key, and then final approval closer to the budget date, and the devil fools with the best laid plans, I guess. Second question then, Mr. Chair, I want to drill down to just a couple of the line items in the budget, in the report itself, and that's specifically the admin costs. They seem to be, if you look at the overall budget, it's gone up 8% and change, but the admin costs have jumped up. I think I know why. I mean, it was mentioned contractual wages and benefit increases, increased IT. We see provincial or federal funding decrease for overhead costs or admin costs, sorry. But can we just get a confirmation from staff on that? And I just want to ask three in particular. So first one I'll ask is, what's the main drivers for the admin costs of the Family and Income Stability Division of 12.5%?
Thank you. Through the chair, the drivers for that admin cost increase is staffing, wages, and IT overhead costs. Those are the drivers. There's very little left in the admin budget. The staffing is over 80% of our administrative budget.
And to an earlier comment made by Director Connor as well, that's probably about 0% of what the province had kicked in their fair share. And how we got the 0%, how we absorbed that, and I should have mentioned in my presentation, was the move. We went from 25,000 square feet at one market to 6,000 square feet at Beckett, and and so there's a huge cost on overhead on our building that we're covering out at Beckett. So it's been a huge change, and that's how we would have came to 0% if our funding partner would have kicked in their portion.
Yep, fair comment, but that was in the report, Mr. CEO. And then I want to ask about the admin costs for children's services in early years.
Ask you to hold that one to a second round, allow other people to have a first time speaking opportunity.
Well, these were all part of the same question.
Well, you're running over your 4 minutes. It's not
okay.
It's
4 minutes.
So any other first time speakers? Seeing none, we'll go to Mayor Davis and then back to Councillor Miller.
Yeah, I'd just like to set the record straight if we're bashing other governments. Certainly, I've been very critical, I was earlier, about the provincial government in terms of admin costs. They aren't maintaining the level of 50%, but at least they aren't reducing it. Who's reducing? It's the federal government. In 1993 through to 1996, it was the Jean Chrétien government that downloaded housing to the provinces. Who is cutting funding? They cut it in 1994. Who's cutting it again in 2024? The federal government. We see right in our report here, in 2021, the federal government for housing costs, building housing, contributed $1,546,000. This year, it's 500,000, $1 million decline. And that's going to phase out in 2030. It's the federal Liberal government that's cutting funding for housing. Did we get any money in that Housing Accelerator Fund? Despite the fact we made a very strong, robust application. We got zero. We got zero from the federal Liberal government. If there's any government shortchanging us on the cost to build housing, it's not the province, it's the federal government. Just want to make sure that's clear. Make sure that message is out there very clearly. So, but regardless, moving forward, we can blame and bash, but the only way we're going to deal with this housing crisis is we all come together. And the federal government has to start paying its fair share of the cost to build housing in Ontario. It's not. It's shortchanging the province compared to other provinces. And this dog war between the federal and the province about who's actually providing housing, we're doing it, and the money should flow to us because it's municipalities like Grant County and the city of Brantford that actually are building housing for those most in need. We need the assistance, and the fighting and the bashing needs to come to an end. We need to come together in pursuit of the common goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Davis. I don't think anybody can dispute that. I'll go back to Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just on the mayor's points, yeah, I agree with them. And I think this would be a great discussion to have over drinks because we're never going to solve it around this, but I think it needed to be said. Just the last question then I'll ask is the admin cost for children's services in early years. That's a 58% increase. I mean, the dollar amounts, it's not a huge amount, 92,000. But again, what's the main driver for that? I suspect I know, but I'd like to hear staff's response, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Through the chair, yes, the drivers are the same for the admin costs for children's services in early years because the provincial funding allocation was cut for admin to a 50-50 cost share and a 5% administration, which is, by the way, lower than the industry standard. Generally, admin is 10%. So those cuts were made to the administrative budget.
Thank you. Does that answer all your questions, Councillor Miller?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other second-time speakers? Councillor Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I think it's both levels of government. I know the mayor is sort of sensitive to the provincial level of government, but I don't belong to either party. So the issue here, Ms. Bryan, could we get a copy of that presentation and your notes because they were pretty explicit. You did a great job there. And I'd like to have them for my record so when I can report from them. But one thing is clear: the provincial government has not had a raise in welfare rates or social services rates since 2018, since they were elected, for a matter of fact. So that's a reduction with inflation. That's a reduction. So you call it what you want. We haven't seen funding increases, and then staff have also told us that they haven't kept their fair share of administration costs. In fact, that's also a reduction because by not paying their share, that's a reduction. So however you want to call it, but both provincial and federal governments are both responsible because the housing portfolio is their responsibility, and they've been shifting it to us. And the $2 million in development charges, that's provincial government, by the way. That's a reduction in funding for us for housing from the provincial government. So there is nobody here that's not guilty. The provincial and federal government, whether it be the Liberal Party, the Conservative Party, they're both just equally as guilty for making this crisis in all the communities across this country and in this province. Thank you.
Thank you. My thanks go to staff for the work that they've done. I can understand this has been a very challenging budget, but the way it's been explained, the rationale, the logic stands. And unfortunately, the end number is a very uncomfortable number and one which I think will get some further debate in the two councils when it comes to them for further consideration. But at this point, I think we can ask the clerk to call the vote.
Item 5.4, 2025 shared services budget. All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving back in the agenda to item 5.1, I think it was separated by Councillor Martin.
Yes, thank you. One of the items in that report is roof replacement on Northland Gardens. Can somebody tell me what materials are being used and what the warranty is for the materials on that roof?
Through the chair, Clayton Pay, Manager of Housing Initiatives. Typically, we use a 25-year premium shingle for the roof repair with a typically a moisture ice barrier along the perimeter and peak.
And what do you usually get out of a 25-year shingle? About 15 years?
Under the premium ones, we can get close to 25 years. It really comes down to the environment of where the building's located, exposure, coverage, trees, things like that.
Did you look at metal roofing?
We do look at metal roofing, but a metal roofing at times is 5 to 8 times more expensive than a shingle roof.
Really? Because I found it about double when I looked into it.
Not with inflation, and largely it has to do with the labor and trades that we can get for metal roofing.
Okay, because usually the lifespan of the metal roof is usually a lot longer than the asphalt as well.
Quite, usually they're 50+ years.
Yeah. Okay, well, keep considering it, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else like to speak on this item? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the vote.
All those in favor of item 5.1? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to item 5.2, the Housing Stability Wintering Plan. Councillor Samwell, you raised this one.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. I'm really pleased to see this report coming forward and that we're planning for the winter time to ensure that we have enough capacity to keep everybody out of the cold. But I did have a question for staff. It mentions in the report that the hours for the winter sheltering will be 8 a.m. to 12 a.m. And I'm wondering what people are going to be doing until 12 a.m. to be able to be out of the cold after most things close. And I'd like somebody to expand on that, please.
Through the chair, I'll start and Katarina will finish up for me. So the hours for the winter shelter will be from midnight till 8 a.m. only. And the reasoning behind that is that there are other spaces available that are much more appropriate during the daytime hours. What we are hoping to see is that the successful proponent would be part of our coordinated access system and they would be guiding clients to the Housing Resource Center, to the emergency intake line, so that they can find more appropriate sheltering for the following night. There's also warming spaces that the Salvation Army Brantford Booth Center and Rosewood House are providing. So folks are able to move away from an overnight temporary winter shelter into where there's appropriate supports for them during the day.
Through the chair. Great question, Councillor Samwell. During 8 a.m. till midnight, the Housing Resource Center at their new location at 73 Murray will be operating their waiting room where they'll be able to connect with staff who will be able to work on a housing plan, divert them to services, and connect to natural supports. Once that waiting room closes, the intent is for folks who require winter sheltering to move to this winter sheltering shelter for additional support and to stay over for the 7-8 hours.
Thank you. I just wanted to ensure that we had coverage because I know when it was to keep out of the heat, we had a little bit of a gap there. So I'm glad to see this has been looked into and taken care of. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll go first to Councillor Celeste and then to Mayor Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm in the same phone call regarding the lady with her children sleeping in the car on Monday evening, and the kids left for school from the vehicle. I don't know whether they can afford gas to drive them to school, but they left the car and went to school. And the reason she was there, she was told that there was no funding left in the budget for a motel for them for that night. Can you clarify that, please? Is that true?
So through the chair, as we've mentioned previously, like, yes, we've had extreme funding concerns at the beginning of 2024, having had over 70 families in motels. A motel stay is anywhere from $100 to $120 per night per room. So it becomes quite expensive, about $3,000 per month for one household to be housed in a motel. So we have really limited and restricted the use of motels to extenuating circumstances right now in order to prepare for the winter months. However, as Katerina Nyezovic has mentioned, that anyone who contacts the Housing Resource Center, if they cannot be successfully diverted, then the Housing Resource Center does connect with the city to discuss the extenuating circumstances to determine how we can help in the most appropriate manner.
So Mary, is the answer yes, there is money, or no, there isn't money?
Yes, there's money. I don't know how much more clear we have to be. Yes, there's money, but we're trying to get people to use the shelter system first before we use motels. And we're trying to divert people back to their families. And if that, if all else fails, there's a social safety net that will provide the motel room.
Okay, so do we make folks, I guess, aware of that, Brian? Like it concerned me when I heard that a mother and children are living in a car because they were told that there was no funding to put them into a hotel. It sounds like there is money, but it's a last resort. But apparently these folks didn't meet the last resort. Is that? I'm trying to understand how they ended up in a car when there's funding to put them into a motel.
So through the chair, we can't speak to specific circumstances due to confidentiality, but as Katerina had mentioned, we have not heard of these specific circumstances coming to us through the Housing Resource Center. So I would encourage anyone in that situation to first contact the Housing Resource Center, and then their staff would connect with our manager of housing stability to discuss the extenuating circumstances.
Okay, thanks, Mary. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. This is the second time this question has come up, so I think maybe there's some room for wider communication of the route that people should follow, and I could perhaps pass that back to staff to think about it. Mayor Davies.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Chair. Maybe a better communication required in order to, so people understand clearly what it is they have to do if they find themselves in those desperate situations. But I will say this, that, you know, month in, month out, year in, year out, I've been extremely impressed by our housing staff, the work they're doing, their commitment to, with the available resources, to meet the housing needs of those most in need in our community. I think generally they do a pretty good job. And this winter sheltering plan is an example of this. It's not being done at the last minute. They're being, staff are being proactive. But I've got a question. How many beds would be available with this plan?
Through the chair, what we're proposing through the RFP process is up to 40 beds.
Right. And based on what you saw last year, do you believe that will be sufficient?
Yes.
Right. And will you, if this is successful, this plan would still be using motels, hotels?
Yes, depending on the circumstance. Families, for example, may not be suitable for this winter sheltering because it is at midnight till 8 a.m. So it wouldn't be conducive for children. So we would still be exploring motels within our sheltering system.
Yeah. And just to put a plug in for the recent decision to purchase Foxbridge, do I take it the long range plan? Let's say now we're going out 2, 3, 4 years, would be not to use motels, but in fact to use Foxbridge for that purpose. Yeah, okay. Last question I have for you is regarding the winter plan for this winter. What happens if you don't receive an expression of interest or an organization willing to do this? And we're banking that one of our current providers will expand what they're doing to provide for winter sheltering, but some of them I don't think have the physical capacity to do it. So what do we do if we don't receive any submissions? What's the contingency plan?
So through the chair, we do have some great providers within the community. So it might be a current provider, it might be a new provider who can step up and receive the RFP. Should the RFP not be awarded to an external party, we do have a contingency for city staff to run the temporary emergency shelter.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Davies. Councillor Sikoli.
Yes, thank you, Chair Bell. I'm just going to continue with where I was earlier in the earlier item, but what I was about to say at that point is I know and I believe wholeheartedly how compassionate our staff is, and I hate to hear stories like this because it sort of paints us in a negative light. And I know that there's probably 800 things that happened when we got to that point, and there's probably a lot of background information that we don't know. But I hate to hear stories like that. And I was more so posing the question because I wanted to ensure that we have appropriate funding, and it sounds like we do. But I'm gonna ask again, do you have enough funding? Because I know that the hotel is for circumstances that are quite exaggerated, and extenuating circumstances is the term that was used when we put a family in a motel. But there's a mother with 2 children sleeping in a car. I can't imagine any more extenuating circumstances than that. So do we have enough fund? I would rather pay more, to be honest. I would rather come up with more money than hear of a mother and a child sleeping in a car, or a mother with 3 children camping until Nova Vita can take them in. Do we need more funding in this line item?
Can I just be, I'm gonna let Mary answer that. Can I be very clear on the Nova Vita item though?
Yeah,
Nova Vita in this community is very different than other communities. It provides shelter supports. It also provides domestic violence. In other communities, places like Nova Vita only do domestic violence. So when you refer to Nova Vita, we'll make sure we're clear on their shelter component, because we don't fund the domestic violence component.
I'm aware.
Okay.
This individual went into the Nova Vita program after being,
So Mary, do you want to answer the second part?
So through the chair, we always have funding constraints. So with Reaching Home federal grant funding and with the homelessness prevention program. So yes, could we always use more funding? Absolutely. However, within our budget, like we do have a finite amount and we have planned for the motels, but it's just like our emergency sheltering system. Rosewood has 40 beds available. Nova Vita has 10 beds available. Salvation Army has 28 beds available. Unfortunately, sometimes those beds are full. So within our budgetary constraints, like we have a plan for shelter beds throughout the winter and for 2025, but sometimes that's finite. So we can't go beyond that.
So yes, you need more money? And what would be the deficit? This is what I'm asking. Like, what is our deficit to make sure that I don't have a mother with 3 children sleeping in a car? And if you don't have that number offhand,
I
I'll
don't
take a
know.
memo later.
I'm not sure how to answer this anymore. We do have funding for that mother than 3 children sleeping in the car. There seems to be a communication gap that the person didn't call the Housing Resource Center. Maybe they did and they didn't reach the manager. For extenuating circumstances, we will put people in motels and hotels. I don't know how much more clear that can be.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. I think that is a very clear statement, and I hope we all take that away. Any other speakers? Councillor Carlton.
Yes, this winterized program, so at midnight to 8 a.m., is it, then they're out wandering the streets in the neighborhoods where these shelters are?
Through the chair, no, what we would have is the successful proponent would be part of coordinated access, and they would be directing whomever used the overnight shelter to the most appropriate supports in the morning. So if someone is still seeking sheltering for the following night, they would be connected with the Housing Resource Center and the emergency intake line so that they can potentially find a more appropriate spot. If it's someone who is looking for supports to be repatriated to family or friends, then the Housing Resource Center would be connected to them. So the overall ideal is to actually bring them into the coordinated access system and start providing housing stability supports in the hopes that they don't have to return to the winter shelter the following night.
And they got to go from the shelter to the coordinated access system, which is where?
So it would be 73 Murray Street, and we would have the proponent providing supports such as bus tickets or however they can move. We don't know yet where it will be located. That is part of the RFP. So depending on the location of the temporary shelter, we would work with the provider on transportation solutions.
Well, you got a list of providers down here. Am I reading the right list? I'm on the right list. Yeah, so Rosewood is on the list. Rosewood's downtown. Is that the same process where we see all the homeless downtown, like what looks like destroying all the neighborhood down there because they're out in the street all day long and can't be in the shelter until certain hours?
Through the chair, that list is for the current emergency shelter providers that we are looking to have a direction on extending their contracts for a year. No, those shelters, they are 24/7. So people who are residing in emergency shelters are able to come and go as they please, and there is no time limit. They are not kicked out of the shelter at a certain time frame in the morning.
And are any of the shelters required to provide any kind of security at all for the facility and for the neighborhood around them?
Through the chair, we do have a good neighbor policy, and I'll ask Katarina to speak a bit more about that, but there is a good neighbor policy that the coordinated access system is either developing or has implemented already, and we are working with all of our coordinated access partners to ensure that they keep the neighborhood in a good state of repair.
Yeah, okay, I'll wait till someone's gonna comment, right?
Through the chair, yes, we have a good neighbor policy through our coordinated access system that became valid this year. The intent of the good neighbor policy is if neighbors have concerns about clients accessing the sheltering system, to connect with the shelter first in order for the shelter to respond. Some of the concerns that we're receiving are folks that aren't associated with the shelter, just homeless folks within the community. And so we're unable to respond to those, but the intent is for those neighbors to connect with the shelters first, allow the shelter time to respond. The intent is also to shelters to talk to the residents about being a good neighbor and what that means, and really educating them on how to be a good neighbor and disrupting that behavior.
Okay, and thank you. And it just seems to me that in the future, we're gonna have to manage and run our own system if we want to make sure it's run consistently and with proper security and proper services and wraparound services. We need a model that's full wraparound services that deal with this issue in its entirety rather than piecemeal, like, it's not our fault we're doing this. This is what's available, but in the future, we're gonna need to look at long-term. I don't see this problem getting any better. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the vote.
Item 5.2, Housing Stability Wintering Plan. All those in favor? Carried, thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of that part of the agenda. There are no resolutions. There are no notices of motion. So the meeting of Social Services Committee is now adjourned, and will now proceed to the Brant and Brantford Local Housing Corporation of Directors meeting. We'll take a couple of minutes break. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll get started in about 30 seconds. So, welcome to the September 4th Brant and Brantford Local Housing Corporation Board of Directors meeting. The roll call has been taken. I think we have lost one or two members. Yeah. If there are any declarations of conflicts of interest for any items appearing on the Brant and Brantford Local Housing Corporation Board of Directors agenda, please let me know. There are no presentations or delegations for today's meeting. And at this time, I would ask members if there are any items the committee wishes to separate for discussion purposes. Seeing none, can I please then get a mover and seconder to place all items for consideration and consent on the floor? Councillor Carpenter and Councillor Sicoli, thank you. Can I please then ask the clerk to call the vote? Reading the titles that are subject to the vote.
The items subject to the vote are item 4.1, Brantford Local Housing Corporation second quarter report and the minutes from June 5th. All those in favor? That carries. Thank you.
I think that brings us to the end of that piece of the business. There are no resolutions. There are no notices of motion. The meeting of the Brant and Brantford Local Housing Corporation Board of Directors is now adjourned. We'll now proceed to the Brantford Municipal Non-Profit Housing Corporation Board of Directors meeting. Brant councillors may be excused if they so wish. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome to the Brantford Municipal Nonprofit Housing Corporation Board of Directors meeting for September 4th. And clerk, has the roll been taken? Perfect. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest today? Seeing none, is there anything that anybody would like separated? All right, with that then, oh, jeez. Didn't see that coming. All right, what would you like separated, Mayor Davis?
5.1.
Okay. All right. At this time, I'll ask, or can I please get a mover and a seconder to place all items for consideration and consent on the floor? Okay. So Councillor Sicoli and Councillor Martin. And clerk, can you please call the vote for anything that's not separated and reading the titles?
The item subject to the vote is the minutes from June 5th, item 5.1. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you.
All right, and moving on to 4.1, any discussion? Mayor Davis, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say through you, Madam Chair, want to congratulate staff. I see that rental arrears for this year in respect of this corporation, the Brantford, not the Brantford, but the Brantford, arrears are down significantly, and I'm sure that's reflective of the type of management that we're lucky to have for this nonprofit housing corporation. And also how, even though these facilities are not the classic supportive housing with the wraparound, full wraparound services, commend staff for kind of a mini supportive housing model, bringing in various service providers that like Life Skills, the Brantford Food Bank, community paramedics, housing stability. I think it's another example of the fine work that's done by our housing staff, and congratulate them.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Counselor Secoli.
I'll ask one question. I wasn't gonna pull it just for this, but since we're out anyway. I noticed that in all of 2024, so not just this quarterly report, but in all of 2024, we've only turned over 2 units. Did I interpret that correctly?
Through the chair, that is correct. So for these two buildings, so for the Beckett Building and for Brandland Meadows, turnover is very low. The Beckett Building, it's a seniors building, so most of the residents choose to age in place. So turnovers only happen when a resident can no longer reside at the Beckett Building or has found alternate accommodations. Unfortunately, with senior citizens too, it might be the last home that they are in. And for Brandland Meadows, those are townhouses, and usually families are residing there. So once again, the turnover is very low.
Is that normal for turnover to have it this low, or is this pretty standard?
Through the chair, in the last few years, especially since the pandemic, we have found that turnover has significantly decreased throughout the housing portfolio. People are having a more difficult time believing any type of housing subsidy into the rental market as private rental market prices have soared. So what we are seeing is a combination of effects, the rental market increasing, people struggling with the economy, even the cost of basic needs has increased, but people have not increased their earnings or other sources of income in tandem. So they are staying longer in our housing units.
And have we ever, or do we have plans to explore any type of program that will help transition people out of our affordable housing units to make room for new people who are in need?
So through the chair, under the Housing Services Act, we actually cannot move people out of housing. What can happen is if a household is receiving a rent geared to income subsidy, if their income has increased to the point where they no longer qualify for the subsidy is removed. However, as the landlord, we do not evict people to move more people in.
That certainly clarifies things.
So the counselor, it sounds, it's, we don't have it in front of us, but Mayor and I off meeting, we'll talk about the flow of individuals from basically encampments right through the system. And you've hit a really good point, because it becomes a bit of a backlog. When people do leave RGI and they go to either rent supplement or to a market rent is, I always call it an economic market rent. It's not the same as what's on the market that we're charging, and we can't. And so many people won't leave. And so it does plug up the flow, the throughput of the system, but we do provide education sessions on how to afford and buy a house and pay, get a mortgage and things like that. But we can't force people to leave, but some people do. But it's a problem in every municipality is that throughput blockage at that point. That's why the CMHC ones at 80% of market rents that get approved by private developers are really important, because they become the next step after that, and then full markets. So it's a whole system step by step.
Thank you for clarifying.
Any further discussion? All right, seeing none, we'll have the clerk call the question.
All those in favor of item 4.1, second quarter report? Carried, thank you.
All right, with that, there's no resolutions, no notices of motion, so we'll be adjourned. Thank you.